Great. Well, good evening, everybody. Thank you for coming. I'm going to try to project. I was exposed to a little bit of a cold from my husband, and so I'm trying to avoid getting it or giving it to you. So I'm wearing a mask. So I'm hoping that my voice will project. So welcome tonight. Here we are, our meeting 8. Welcome to everybody online as well. Thank you for joining us. And we have a couple of people missing today. We couldn't make it at a conference. And hopefully we'll be able to circle back with them at the end of after this meeting. So last week we had a pretty robust conversation going around the room and having the conversation about house size. And that was, and so tonight what we want to do is really continue that conversation and dive deeper into it and continue that. We want to hear from what we talked about last week. We're going to get an overview for Miles on that. Then we also want to talk about the key ingredients, all of the key ingredients that are on the table for developing the planning scenarios that we are going to be able to use and have to achieve the goals and that reflect our values as well as part of this process. So, Michael, do you have anything else you want to add?
Just I think the last meeting was great in that the discussion was lively. There were a variety of points of view shared, some great specific ideas, and the reason we're continuing with this is because we don't want to leave something just because it was the subject of the last meeting. We want to interrogate it to the point that we feel like we're arriving at not necessarily consensus, but kind of a mutual understanding of sort of what's on the table and what isn't. And we did not get there last time. We finished with just everyone articulating their individual points of view. So we're staying on this subject, and if it feels like we're not going fast enough, that's because we can't go faster than we need to. And this is a really important part.
Yeah, so Miles is going to just refresh our memory and give us some key takeaways from our conversation that we had. So thank you.
Well, and hopefully this just warms us all up to the conversation that we had last time and gets us back into that mindset. So really quick for the meeting tonight, our agenda. I don't think my clicker's working there. All right, getting back in action. Our agenda, we're just going to go over the white paper really quickly, the key takeaways from the discussion last time. Then we're going to get into the bulk of this discussion, as the co-chair said, really rolling up our sleeves and continuing where we left off. And then we're going to take a quick roadmap of where we go from here. And then, as always, public comment will conclude the meeting. So you all got the memo in your packet of the big thematic summaries from the discussion we had at our last meeting. And as a recap, I'm going to run through each of the big key takeaways very quickly, and then we're going to pause for discussion so that you all can clarify any nuances, any finer points that you think we may have missed or captured incorrectly. And hopefully this sets the stage for really continuing on in the conversation that we did not finish at our last meeting. So what we heard very loud and clear is that one size does not fit all, and that this is a complex challenge that we are all rising to face, and there's going to be a need for sophisticated solutions and not a one-size-fits-all strategy. And that we also discussed in detail that home size is not the only solution. There are all of those other big threshold questions that we're going to be looking at tonight and begin to get into in future meetings, but it may be part of that solution. And that greenhouse gas emissions and impacts are a concern, but they are certainly not the only concern. We had a lot of discussion at our last meeting about going beyond net zero and looking at other critical resources like our water usage, the role of renewable energy and carbon offsets, vehicle miles traveled, traffic, infrastructure demands, sensitive habitats and wildlife corridors, and all of the other outdoor amenity loads that may not be factored into just the GHG analysis. So that beyond net zero was a theme I heard a lot from you all at our last meeting. And again, this is a report back of what you all said, so we'll have some time for you to tell us what we need to round out a little bit on this in just a second. And certainly there seemed to be a preference for certainty and simplification of how we approach some of these issues over risk and uncertainty and complexity. And perhaps that manifests itself in a simplification of the code so that property owners in the community can predictably navigate the GM2S process and manage risk and know what they are getting. On the flip side of that, also the community will want to have some certainty and some simplicity and some understanding of where the process is going. Also, a big theme was low-hanging fruit, looking at where are those areas of common ground where we can begin to build some consensus and some momentum. Could be green building requirements, we heard a lot about that, and energy codes, strict water conservation measures, that type of thing. And then the final one was balancing all of this. Balance was a huge theme from our last meeting, and balancing a resilient and sustainable economy that brings in community values with economic resiliency to prevent unintended consequences and address the ways in which large homes influence our economy, service workforce, such as traffic, housing, and quality of life. So these were the big themes that you all saw in the memo. I know I ran through them really quickly, but I do want to do it quickly intentionally so that we can pause for some discussion to make sure that we accurately captured the big themes, because these distillations are critically important. And with that, I'll turn it over to our co-chairs.
Great, thank you, Michael. So now we want to have a conversation with everybody. And we just want to ask you, are there some refinements to the themes? Is there anything that didn't get expressed that you might want to express now? And then so we can talk about really how do we align our values and land use strategies with our shared vision. So anybody have any comments about our conversation from last week? Okay, see Max.
Yeah, I kind of wanted to start with, I know in the last meeting, one of the things I said slowly started to gain some momentum. And I'm not saying I'm regretting saying it, but I realized that I think it started gaining momentum. What I'm talking about is obviously the TDR, GMQS. And the more I think about it, the more I like it, but the more complex it gets, and we're trying to be simpler. So I was wondering if it would be appropriate to ask Cindy and Suzanne to comment a little bit before we go too far in that scenario, for you guys to say why you may think it may not be a good idea, or maybe you say that it is, but I'd love to hear just a general overview of what you think of that. If you guys think that's appropriate at this time.
Is that appropriate now, or do you want me to hold that?
Do you have a long answer or a short answer?
Well, the really short answer is, I really need to confer with Johnny Lee, who I was not able to get a conversation with, but growth management is a competitive system where, you know, you kind of close bid system. TDRs are the exemption out of growth management, and to require someone go through growth management and get a TDR, you know, it's just going to be a real art if that is able to happen legally. But it definitely makes me start getting creative about maybe not so much it's just part of growth management, but maybe it's something else on its own. Maybe it's a scoring system on its own with TDRs. I mean, there's a million different ways you can take off with it. So thank you for helping us, you know, spark some creativity there. But no, I think we ought to continue to run with those creative thoughts, and then assess them out and figure out what is good work. Suzanne, you have anything to add?
And Forrest has his hand up.
Max,
Forrest, go ahead.
great.
Forrest, we're not picking you up super clear. Can you hear us?
Road, someone can hear me.
Barely. What? Give it a go.
Yeah, I can hear you.
All right, we got you.
Okay, so I didn't really pick up exactly, and this is just like a specific. Okay, yeah, I'm just wondering about a specific information piece from last week, which was, is there like a distinct square footage cutoff that kicks into play the 3-time exponential resource use? Is there some, or is there a range square footage where that really comes in?
It just increases fairly linearly, if you look at the graph. It's not a specific point, no.
Got it. So I think for the folks in the room, what I heard was a question directed to August about if there are distinct square footage thresholds that trigger some of these impacts. And August, you said not specifically. And I do want to just remind the group too, for this exercise, we're going to be trying to clarify what we heard from last time. So this is a great example of those clarifications. I think we'll have time to get into more detail on new ground. I just want to make sure that we're all clear on the ground we've already trodden.
Did you hear that answer, Forrest?
I did, and thank you.
Great.
Was it Forrest asking the question or answering?
Yes,
Ask the question.
August answered.
And who answered?
August.
Who we heard from last time on the greenhouse gas.
Is our consultant on the greenhouse gas? On the house side?
I disagree with what August just said. Yeah.
Yeah, I thought it was exponential, not linear.
Yeah.
The graph looks like it's linear, but the numbers that are quoted reflect an exponential relationship.
I think that's the current, I can suggest we can park on it and come back to it.
I don't have it in front of me, right?
Well, kind of my thought was, and I agree with Max, that we don't want to make this more complicated, because I feel like every time something's complicated, there's the opportunity for developers to work their way into a bigger house with more energy use or whatever. And kind of my thought, and this was just, I'm just throwing this out as an idea, is that TDRs could be used to increase home size. And I'm not a proponent of big houses, but you know, that I'd like to see everything shift smaller, but TDRs could be used to increase home size from wherever we want to start the base size. But that doesn't give them just, okay, you're good to go. They still have to go through the growth management system with all the other things, with energy use and water conservation, you know, and all those other things that we're trying to aspire to here to get their development approved. So maybe that's a simple way to integrate the two, being able to, you know, use a TDR to make your house a little bigger, but that's the only thing that, you know, that's only part of it. You still have to do with the growth management system.
And so, thank you. Anybody else have any other points you'd like to make, clarifications?
There seem to be a lot of related but differing issues, ways to deal with all of this. And I would like to propose that we really stick to the land use code highway and not deal with things like building department energy use and efficiency, not get into a discussion about water consumption and waste, sensitive habitats. All those, I think, are outside the purview maybe of the land use code, or seem to be. So what I'm suggesting is that we simplify the discussion just towards house size or whatever. I'm not sure if that makes sense. I also wanted to talk about the possibility that And it's mentioned, I think in the notes, of the possibility of a rush to development as the community becomes more and more aware of what we're discussing. And I was thinking of the possibility of proposing to the Board of County Commissioners a moratorium on development, maybe for the next year, until we sort these things out, in the same way that the city did.
Would you make that proposal?
Well, just to comment on your idea of sticking to the land use code, I think it's one of our very first meetings, and I can't remember the date. We all kind of, what I felt like was an agreement that folks, the land use code was our major focus on, but there could be other pieces like the energy code and the building code that can help us get there. And so, for example, I think with the energy code, when the energy code requires a home to be more energy efficient, that reduces it's the greenhouse gas emissions during the use of the house. Maybe not for the construction or maybe not related to the size, but it will reduce the, as we've adopted better building code. So I think we agreed that so I think that would be, your suggestion might be a departure from what we
Well, the
talked about.
suggestion is more that that's an area beyond our expertise. I mean, most of us are just laymen. Yes, that would be a part of it, but on a general level, and hopefully that comes along with it. Or am I making sense?
Yes, okay, maybe
The way I would phrase that is you might want to make specific land use code recommendations with other recommendations directed towards building codes or transportation issues or something like that, but really more specific than the land use code.
Can I just make one comment? I think it's important to remember the goals that the BOCC did set out, which is the 90% reduction by 2050, as well as net zero by 2030, which does bring in the building code as part of that. So I think it's important to remember that there are goals that the board called out that is specific to land use and also does impact the building codes.
Sophia?
So maybe it would help to reassure Tim and everybody else about how they will become more than laymen. How do they get the information that they need, and where would it come from, and when would it come, how much of it will there be? So that he or no one else feels like they're just grinning or flying by the seat of the pants.
And so I think that this goes back to maybe what Cindy touched on a couple of meetings ago. You all don't need to come up with the exact details of the building code. I think giving direction of what you want to see changes in, and then staff will come back with scenarios for you to see what feels right. So it's not, no one here, it's not expected any of you need to be the experts in the building code or the energy code, but to be able to represent the community that y'all hear, and we'll bring back the specifics to say what feels right or doesn't feel right.
Could you just, it might be part of your next part of your presentation, but I was wondering if you could just walk us through the different caucus areas that do allow different house sizes. Because I know that a number of the individual caucuses, like Maroon Creek, so places where you could build 15,000 square feet would be like Starwood, East Aspen, Red Mountains. If you could just kind of roll overview.
Did we have a slide?
We did.
We did, I thought so. Yeah. If we did
Do you have a slide? I'm not sure.
Which caucus and the maps? That's what I recall. It's in the.
But quickly, I could just say, going from east to down valley, east of Aspen caucus area allows 15,000 square feet. As you get around the roundabout, you go up Castle Creek, it's 15,000 square feet. Maroon Creek caucus is 5,750. You go on down the valley to Brush Creek has just proposed 5,750. It's not enacted yet, but their master plan requests it. Then you go further down, Woody Creek is 15,000. Emma is 5750. I'm sorry, 8250. Snowmass,
5750. Snowmass copies.
proposed is
That's
57.
Snowmass Village.
It's 80, no,
No.
Snowmass,
Snowmass.
old Snowmass, and then that's
Well,
capital
we voted
Snowmass.
on it.
It's not codified yet.
The board kind of commissions.
Yeah.
And what are they?
And then East
8250?
Snowmass Creek itself, though, Upper Snowmass Creek is still 15,000. So, then Emma, the Crystal is 15,000, and the Frying Pan is 5750. So there's
Voted right now for 15.
that's 15.
Can I ask a clarifying question? You have somebody who has their hand up. But thank you for asking that. Yeah, any follow-up? So if you have these limits, can you use the TDR or GMQS to increase beyond the 5750 in any of these caucuses that you have?
Those are the limits. So if you have 15, you can obviously use TDRs to go beyond the given 5750 that everyone pretty much has the right to use it in the rural areas mostly. And then, I mean, there's some exceptions, but beyond 5750, if your area allows it, you use TDRs in increments of 2,500 square feet to get up to the 15. In the areas, you know, that only allow 5750, that's the max.
Why did you ask that question? What does that clarification help you better?
I think just because we're talking, as we're talking about max house size, a number of caucuses have already discussed this and voted on this. And I think that it just sort of narrows our thinking that those decisions would affect the other caucuses, because likely we would not go below that 5750 for a number of reasons. But it's just worth thinking about that we're talking about specific areas.
Yeah, I think it's a great point. I assume that was it, but I just wanted to hear you
And
say
there's
it.
more
This
data.
would result in some of them would, depending on if there were to be a maximum size discussed, some of them would be well under already.
Mm-hmm.
And so out of the 9 caucuses, it looks like 5 actually have limits, right? Well, actually, opposite 5.
I didn't do the math.
They have that limit, so, okay.
Rick?
Yeah, I think it's a great approach because we talked about low hanging fruit and where do we really need to focus our attention as it relates to climate change or the goals of the BLCC have, but also how do those caucuses and their limits relate to the demand on resources from the community. And I think that when you start to look at 5750 versus the 15,000, you're talking about an exponential increase in service demands and energy and everything else. And I think those are the things that need to be addressed. Those are the areas that also seem to be the more corporate business-like opportunities and operations and you know, small scale lodges kind of approach that really put a lot of pressure on all of our resources. And that probably contribute to a significant amount of the traffic that drives up the highway every day, whether they're being built or whether they're being serviced. So I think it's a very big differentiator in the conversation going forward. And, you know, the pay-to-play process or whatever you want to call it, the intent, I think, of GQMS and TDRs was to make a competitive environment for people who want to go bigger. But there's been so many side channels that they've pursued that it's kind of weakened that whole system. And I think that's one of the things that I've seen is it's like a foundation. You know, you've got all of a sudden this part of the foundation rows, this part of rows, this part of rows. And pretty soon you're not on solid footing anymore. I think that's kind of what's happened in the last 25 years.
Great. Are there any other comments that we can move on from here then?
Anyone
There's
else?
somebody on the screen. Chris?
Chris, we saw you had your hand up for a second. I don't know if your question was answered.
Hi, sorry, I will pose it real quick. So this just kind of goes back to the, your question about themes being covered. And I think the question I have was addressed a little bit in the conversation. And the question is, what balance do we want to put on mitigation versus direct impact? I think, if we want to use a suite of tools in a sophisticated way, they can be used for either or some level of combination. But one thing I was seeing coming out of the last discussion that I saw, just kind of saw reflected in limited amounts in the follow-up memo. And, maybe it doesn't rise to a key theme. It's just something that stands out to me, but is how much we want to prioritize, that question. So it's just like a mitigation versus direct impact question. And I think it's one worth asking because while, there, as discussed last week, there are benefits and drawbacks to each.
Thank you, Chris. I think it's a good question that you're posing there, and we're going to tackle it right now, but it's something for us to think in our minds and ponder as we go forward.
Very quick question. My understanding, and believe me, it's superficial, my level of understanding, but in order to go over 5750, you basically have to go through the GMQS system or have TPRs or a combination, whatever. So one of the things, and you don't have to answer this right now, but one of the questions I have, it seems to me there would be no houses over 5,050 square feet without TDRs, essentially, at least the way the game's played right now. Or GMQS, which apparently people don't use very much, or? Yeah, so my question is, which doesn't need to be answered right now, since TDR seems to be the exemption, seem to be a big player in creating these homes. Are we gonna talk about that? Which you don't answer. It's rhetorical, because without TDRs, these big things don't happen without the changes.
Yeah, and I think that's where I want to go through all of the levers, go back to the threshold questions in a few minutes and kind of make sure that we're all saying, these are levers that we can consider, right? We have to, there isn't one solution. We don't have like one big hammer. We have, small ball pieces. But it's the part where we got the big houses that don't fit there.
Well, and that's why we're on the question that we are now, because there is some degree of consensus of there is such a thing as too big, right? And some homes are getting there. Then the suite of tools and the sort of the artful solution we start to pursue. But we only just sort of did one round on that question. And so we're gonna try to put a little bit of a finer point on, should it be on the table? Should limiting home size be on the table, and see where we are on that? And then to your points, we will start to explore what an artful solution might look like, including, closing loopholes through a simplification process. Some of the questions are actually confirming that we are having the right conversation right now. I think.
I missed the last meeting because I was in county commissioners meeting, so I apologize for that. One of the things, looking over what was said, that we can't lose sight of, and this is kind of ironic, but larger homes sometimes contribute to the rural character in the community because they enable a property owner to do a larger home on a very large site and not pursue subdivision or more density on a property. So I just an observation, I've seen that for years through the system, that someone's content to have a larger home and then preserve a lot of land. So it's just it's ironic because it actually contributes to rural character.
And Glenn, if I could follow up on that too, I think one of the questions that, or one of the levers that's on the table is zoning. Do we have it right? Do we have, the zoning correct. If that's a threat, if you will, that there might be more homes, do we have zoning right? Have we zoned it like we meant it, so that if it were developed fully, that it would be what the community wants to see?
Well,
So
I
it's a
think the
question.
10-acre zoning, 20-acre zoning is probably a product of the political times and may not be appropriate anymore.
Yeah, something to think about. So just wanted to say that's another lever we have that we haven't talked a lot about. It's just pure zoning.
Glenn, can you explain that a little bit, why it may not be appropriate?
Well, I mean, you look where the 10-acre zones are. Castle Creek's zoned 10 acres. The majority of Woody Creek is on 20 acres. We've got a lot of 30-acre zoning in Snowmass Creek, Capitol Creek. You look up the Crystal River, there's lots of 10-acre zoning still.
And those 10 acres allow one primary residence?
Yeah, so anyway, I think those were the result of political compromises all the way back in the 1970s. And so Cindy's right, those zoning districts may not be appropriate anymore. And that's when you're talking about land use legislation, zoning's a very easy tool to do.
When you say it's not appropriate, do you mean the zoning should be for larger size?
Well,
or?
yeah, my feeling is it should be lower density. Like, why not make it 1 unit per 35 in some of these sensitive rural areas? And that'll reduce the density right off. And where you have wildlife concerns, scenic concerns, and just where you want to have rural character, zoning is really straightforward and simple. And it's way easier to deal with the growth management, and TDRs. It's just straightforward.
I think you're all crazy. Moratorium, zoning, that's pretty hard. That's not.
Well, he's already non-conforming, so he doesn't care if he's more non-conforming.
Yeah, politically it's hard, but as far as writing the legislation, you could do it, in an hour.
Oh, yeah. You could do it.
To the discussion about simple, and I live in what's not a very simple code day to day, and right, if anybody's really thinking we're gonna try and make that more simple, right, zoning is a cleaner tool because you lay out from the get-go what somebody can and can't do. Size, whatever that's, lot size, house size, uses, all of that comes out of zoning.
But that only works if one landowner owns enough pieces to do that. If I own a 10 acre and you own a 10 acre, you can't downzone me because I already have it, right? Am I accurate?
Right.
So if I own 100 acres and it's 10 acres on it, I can turn it into 10, or I can turn it into 3, if it's 35 or 2, whatever it is. So my question is, how many parcels are owned in that? Is that a big piece of the puzzle that we're talking about? Because that's a completely different, to my thinking, I agree with your point, but I don't know how it really affects this conversation, because I don't know how many pieces of property could be subdivided into 10 or 20 or whatever.
We can easily find that out by just seeing what is, quote, underdeveloped under zoning today.
But it has to be not only, but also, so I guess that means it's owned by one entity. Because everybody in here owns 10 acres. You can downzone it all you want, but I still have the right to build one on it because it's under previous zone, right?
But as Suzanne mentioned, zoning has it carries a lot of weight with it. So it's not, the density might not be affected, but other things might be affected. How much you can do on that 10 acres as far as your size, setbacks, all that kind of stuff would be affected by what the zoning says.
So that's why it's so politically difficult, because if I own 10 acres and you downzone to 35, my property is unbuildable. I mean, it's a taking essentially, right? I just don't understand.
Could be.
And what's your reaction to that?
I don't agree with what you're saying, Doug, because the way the code's written, if you're a substandard size lot and you're legally created, you're still going to be entitled to develop under the system that we have in growth management. If you're created before June 12, 1978, you're exempt. Whether you are a 10-acre lot or a 30-acre lot in a 35-acre zone, you still have that right if you were created prior to the enactment of growth management. So you would just be a substandard size lot, but your rights wouldn't change. And what Cindy's talking about, we really look at is these undeveloped bigger parcels, how many are there and how would they be affected by the change in zone? And that's a pretty easy thing to analyze. But politically, you know, the commissioners have catch so much grief over proposed down zone, you know, taking Castle Creek and down zoning to 1 per 35 instead of 1 per 10. Because people really understand that, and you know, it'll get people's attention.
But it's also a process that gets you maybe where you can visualize as a community what you want. When we first did rural and remote, that's a big downside. And, you know, I hesitate to say everybody loves it, but a lot of people think it was the right thing to do now. But that was probably the last big downside we did.
That's one of the levers that we can put in our, or hammers or whatever. Ingredients, you were talking about chicken the other day, like what the ingredient, but that's one of the ingredients. And it's not on our threshold questions, we might want to add it to it, because we have talked a lot about zoning it like we need it. And so it's something we probably should look at and add to our list of things to consider.
We're still kind of in the where we want to get to and why, maybe the why we want to, and then the sort of how, I think is still very much our conversation now. Cliff has his hand up. Go ahead, Cliff.
You're muted.
I was just about to text you. I didn't think you saw my hand. I kind of want to ground this a little bit, conversation a little bit, with why we should reduce house caps and make a case for that. Glenn, I actually agree with you that rezoning an area from 10 units to 3 units on the 35 per 35 acres. I like that, but I still think house caps have to be reduced. And I'll tell you why. Less construction, less waste from construction, less services, less energy, less employees, less traffic. It's as simple as that. We are feeding an industry that is bigger than tourism in this valley. And house caps will at least keep that industry from growing out of control. I have no problem with those who are here making a living, but we don't need to be attracting more contractors, more electricians, more plumbers. As is, none of us can get one now, and we already need more. So the more we build, it's just going to be a death spiral. That's my comment.
Sir, just real quick, a couple of friends of mine built houses in Snowmass, and this was in Pioneer Springs. Is that part of Snowmass Village? Whatever. They were both in that subdivision, and this was quite a few years ago. And they were both convinced to build 15,000 square feet because at that time, 10 years ago, they were saying, we're probably not ever going to be able to build this big in the future. So you got to build this big now. So the rush to develop has been happening for 10 years, the rush to develop these big houses. And neither one of them wanted to build houses that big, but they both ended up building that big because the architects and whoever was helping them said, you've got to build full, as much as you can, because, and they're both building these houses to live in for now, but since then they both sold them, and so for an investment too, and yeah, so it's already happening that people are building 15,000 square feet just because that is the best investment for that property.
Yeah, and I think it's a really good point, and that's investments. And I think when we started the conversation going back, we've been talking about asking or requiring housing to look like housing, not just an investment. So I think that's what we're trying to get to some degree. All right, are there other comments? Oh, I'm sorry.
You know, while we're tossing out zoning change suggestions, I've been arguing for an effective slope reduction formula for a long time. The county slope reduction formula never, as far as I know, has never affected anyone's density, unlike the city's formula. And at least in our valley, in the Castle Creek Valley, an effective slope reduction formula would significantly affect the build out on the remaining parcels without the necessity of making everybody substandard in size, which is a scary thought to me. But
Could you explain what that term means for someone like me who doesn't know?
well, you set up a formula to reduce the allowed density based on the degree of pitch of the land. So as your land gets steeper, the amount of build out on your land is reduced because you don't get as much credit for that more steeply sloped land. So, and the city's had an effective slope reduction formula for a long time, but the counties, in my experience, have never had any effect on any site I've ever worked on. So.
Helpful, especially for me, so that's great. All right, are there any other questions from anybody online? No comments? Okay. Right, so I think we're ready to move on to our next topic.
Everyone else okay with that? Okay, good.
And I think this discussion is a great example of how, in looking at house size, it's rippling into all of these other big threshold questions that we've raised. And so that's where we're going to be going tonight to set up that discussion. Really, what we're talking about is triangulating our goals and our values that contribute to quality of life with some of those big threshold questions. So my job is just to kind of level set us all, set the table as we start to look at the different ingredients. So when we're talking about that, the goals, we've got them on screen, we've got them up here, you'll see them in the room at virtually all of our meetings. But essentially, as set forth by the DOCC and the statement of purpose that kicked off this process, the three goals are reduction of greenhouse gas emissions by 90% by 2050. Number two, residential net zero by 2030. And doing that with the third goal of creating a healthy level of economic vitality. So these are just a reminder, they were set forth in order to guide us in this process. And then the values, our shared values that contribute to quality of life, have evolved since our very first meeting when we all talked about our vision for the county in 2050, really looking at what are the core values that contribute to quality of life, climate action and environmental sustainability, a healthy, balanced, and resilient and inclusive economy, equity and affordability, rural preservation, and community carrying capacity. So these were the values along with our goals that really have been guiding us in our deliberations. So to move forward, looking at our big questions, the threshold questions, the first one that we dug into at our last meeting and continue tonight on house size. Should TDR and GM2S systems be overhauled? That's another threshold question. Should we focus on future development or what already exists? Short-term rentals, affordable housing. Should the urban growth boundaries be revised in that land use pattern? Really, the last three all kind of come down to land use pattern. Should growth be limited to areas deemed appropriate for increased density? Should there be concentrated areas of transit-oriented development? And then important note on all of these questions is they all include critical, if so, how components that really would require a drill down. But when we look at our big threshold questions, we've sent around the survey link to those that really haven't changed for about the last 3 meetings as we collectively developed them. So when we look at these in juxtaposition with the key factors that were in the VOCC statement of purpose that kicked this process off, the key factors here were residential house size, residential redevelopment, GMQS and TDRs, and environmental constraints. So when you overlay them with our threshold questions, you can see they align almost perfectly. And this group has, rightly so, identified a couple new topic areas on the role of STRs and affordable housing to explore. So I think it's an important context to, as we get into the house size discussion and future discussions and looking what's on the table, that our key questions really haven't changed. So that brings us to more discussion. And I'm going to turn it over to the co-chairs, Michael and Mona, to really kind of tie up this conversation we've been having on house size before we start to look at some of those other threshold big topics. Michael, Mona?
Yeah. So I think what we want to do is make sure that we're all in agreement. We might not get complete agreement amongst the group, but to say, just to identify what is on the table here that we're talking about. And so I think the question is, should house size be limited? Should that be on the table here? And that's kind of a yes or no question of whether we want to move forward with that. And we talked about it last week a lot. We had the conversation about, we had the white paper, and that we discussed that quite a bit. And I think what we want to do is follow up on our conversation from last week and ask everyone, should house size be on the table? Should that be part of it? And again, as Miles was just saying, that's just one of the questions that we need to discuss and dive into and ask ourselves if we're ready to, and just ask ourselves if we're ready to move forward with that. So, yeah, I don't want to add anything.
No.
Yeah, so I think, can we take a poll, thumbs up, thumbs down, and around the group? And see if we're ready to do a thumb poll, if you will, not a thumb war, a thumb poll. And if you're ready to
Thumb up is limit.
thumb up, it would be limit. Yes, thank you. Thumb up would be a limit. The question is, should house size be a factor when should be one of the levers that we're talking about? Should that be on the table? Should that be an ingredient? All of the conversations that we've been having, or the analogies that we've been using, should house size be on the table as far as one of the levers that we're using to reach the goals that Miles just went through and over.
But it would be defined, like it's not, we're not voting on everything 57-50, we're just saying, should it be in?
Exactly. It's still stay on the table as conversation.
That's right. It's just, should be on the table. That's what we're voting on right now. And then.
Let's let Nicholas ask.
It's similar thing, like, as long as you guys have commented on some of the questions that I have too, is, are we voting on, is there gonna be a hard limit? Is that the question, or is it something that, are we going to talk about house size? Is that what we're saying, yes or no to?
Yes. So I think if we can all say, yes, that should be on the table, that should be, then we'll need to dive into it a little bit further. What's the limit that we should be having a conversation?
Well, that's my question, is I think from last meeting, I think some people were saying that there should be a hard limit. Some people are saying that we shouldn't give a hard limit because that's one tool. And it seems like this question is kind of asking that, but not really. So that's why I'm a little unclear about what this thumbs up is exactly about.
Yeah, so it's maybe a 2 or 3 step process. The first step, the first question, the first step is, should it be on the table? And then you can get into it. Should we start getting into a hard limit? So, or what should that limit be?
Or should there be a process by which homes, there can be a limited number of homes, and it could stay at 15,000 square feet, but because the process gets more competitive and there are more difficult thresholds to get to that number, they will be reduced that way. So there's a number of ways to get there. Really, we're just trying to take the temperature based on a white paper that really kind of made the case that this ticks a lot of the boxes, that like as home gets bigger, we can debate if it's linear, geometric, or multiplicative, which I think is actually what it is, but we just want to say, like, does this belong on the table as a dial that we will adjust in a variety of ways potentially?
Really quickly, we're supposed to do this through the lens of the OCC vision, through the lens of the goals and the values, correct?
Yes.
Yeah.
And then a vote for or against this will not limit other considerations like
Absolutely.
TDRs, GMQS.
Right, there's other threshold questions, and we want to go through that same process.
If I could just say real quickly, I think what we're asking for is a way to understand if you're willing to entertain house size on the table in our package of scenarios that we'll bring back to you. So it's not like it's your last chance to look at it, anything like that, but we just need to know if we can put that in the package of tools that we're gonna use to develop a few scenarios to bring back.
So if I'm understanding correctly, it's pretty simple. If we all said thumbs down, this would be off the table, we never talk about it again, things would stay exactly how they are, house size. By saying thumbs up, we would be agreeing that, yes, this is a worthwhile conversation to continue.
That's
right.
Thank you. All right. Okay.
I'm not getting back to 15,000-foot explanation.
All right, so, if we're, all right, and how many, I guess, are we ready to consider?
Thanks, Max.
Outside something. Okay, and then on the, how do we, I see Linda, I see Forrest and Bill, and I see Adam, and I can't see Sierra.
And folks online can put it in the chat too.
Okay, if you could put that in the chat.
Maybe any dissenting opinions on the chat, or we all thumbs up so far?
So far, I'll.
Okay, so, online.
I think everybody online. Just on free. Chat is thumbs up.
If you have a 15,000 square foot house.
So we should ask the opposite question before we move on. I don't think everybody has visible in the room. Is there anybody that would not have this house size be on the table? Okay, it sounds like house, it's house size is on the table. Great.
I think the big question going on is, are all greenhouses visible?
I can't hear, I'm sorry. Everybody's freezing.
I all greenhouses visible.
That's why we want to keep going with it, because it's cold in here, so we want to keep going with it.
I had him turn it up before he left, but he's gone.
Yeah, it's correct, it's a sustainable building.
So, property manager lives with parachute.
Well, if you close those doors, it's hard to walk up. That's part of
Yeah,
it.
let's close the doors, actually. Yes, if you close the doors, it'll warm up in here.
So,
Being an energy geek, we're bringing all that cooler air
Breathe
in
on each
here.
other.
The biothermal energy.
so with all that going on, I didn't hear what Christy was trying to say to the room.
Yes, I was making the joke, are all green buildings this cold?
Oh.
Right, I will think of that actually.
Okay, thank you all. So I think there's some other questions and factors for us to continue to move on. And that is the.
You want to go back to the presentation?
Mona, can I just answer Christie by saying, the last time I went on a tour here in Armonk, everybody was doing the vision, and everybody in here was wearing, the workers were all wearing their coats, and they all had heating chairs.
There isn't any heating, honestly. there is a purpose. So, you can't turn anything up necessarily. Okay.
So just to confirm with everybody, there's unanimous thumbs up on the table and moving on. Great.
Yeah, sounds good. Okay, so now there's other topics to prioritize here, in addition to house size. I mean, just the point that many of you have been making, like, what other levers can we employ that will help us achieve our goals, right? And so we're wanting to kind of look at some of the other issues too. Should TDR, GQ systems be overhauled? I think that's another question that we want to grapple with here. Should we focus on future development or what already exists, sort of the redevelopment? Or yes, or both, thank you. Should the county short-term rental policies be overhauled? Should the county's affordable housing policies be overhauled? Should urban growth boundaries be revised for environmental constraints? And should growth be limited to areas deemed appropriate for increased density? And should there be a concentrated areas of transit-oriented development? When I see those questions, Cindy, I ask myself, is that zoning? Would all of that come under, would those last three questions come under zoning?
Were the last three questions, I don't think those last three questions were up here.
And this was the consolidated one that brought those last three questions into sort of the land use pattern and revisiting the UGB. But just to show, they were directly from the threshold questions, the final three that are highlighted.
Yeah. Sorry,
Well, land use pattern wise, yeah, I mean, there's a lot that zoning could do. If you say, okay, all of a sudden we want to see a lot of density, we think it makes sense around Aspen Village Mobile Home Park as a transit-oriented development site, and it's turned into a new growth area. Zoning would bring that into play. So it is, Mona, something the land use code could look at basically with those last three questions.
Should urban growth boundaries be revised? Should growth be limited to areas deemed appropriate for increased density? And then should there be concentrated areas of transit-oriented development?
All zoning.
All zoning. Yeah.
Well, yeah, that's the mid-valley. It's not Licking County south of Aspen Village. And this is what we've been struggling with here for 30-some years, is that even though urban growth boundaries were evolving in the 90s, we could not get anybody to accept density. Even though we had water and sewer services close by and a major highway and transit and all those things. So there's an attitudinal problem with those bottom three when it comes to trying to get through the political process. And we're seeing it right now on a small project here in the Mid-Valley that's just being beat up continuously for an effort to develop it, within 100 feet of the highway and recreation opportunities. And so there's a mindset and I wrote this down, is to say, what are the basic tenets of contemporary land use that will allow us to have the values intact that we share. And we can't get past that boulder. And in the Pickens County area, I can see a few areas the city would have to accept development on the roll, for example, or business center to grow. But Aspen Village doesn't have the infrastructure to support much more than already is there. So do we extend water mains?
I could just interrupt. I think this is a bigger, broader
It
question.
is.
We're not getting into the specifics yet. And
Right.
if people wanted to explore that, then we would take all those sites and explore them.
Okay.
Because you're right. You're right.
That's
There's
where this
certain-
development's gonna go.
Yeah.
And that's the regionalism part of this. I agree with Cindy, but it's gotta go on the table. It can't be, this can't be talked about just as a Pickens County boundary.
Yeah.
Are you wanting us to choose the next topic?
Yeah, so,
That's-
sorry, I went to the wrong slide, but yeah, we want to start prioritizing the big topics. And so we want to start looking at beyond house size, where do we want to go? Do we want to dive into overhauling the GMQS and the TDR system. And I think to the point that Nicholas brought up, is we should probably dive into the actual house size, if that's, part of our conversation. How do we want, to Max's point, do we want to set a limit, and when do we want to have that conversation? Do we want to focus on a specific limit to house size? And that's probably a question we should have on the table as well.
That's on the table.
Yeah, yeah. So do we want to dive?
Do you want me to describe the dot exercise?
Yeah.
Might be helpful. So essentially, you've probably all been able to read the slide, but we want to understand order of magnitude. Where do you all perceive the greatest potential in achieving our goals, reflecting our values based on the big threshold topics that we've identified collectively here? And so we've got a simple dot exercise. You each will get 3 dots. We've got them written on a whiteboard here. So I think this last one is maybe already changed. If Michael, when I heard it correctly, that last one is maybe revisiting the land use pattern. To clarify some of the discussion we just had.
Yeah.
Everybody's comfortable with that. What we'll do, and I think here's, that around, I usually like to be the bad light, but you're much better at it. So we've got these 5, we've added residential house size to the bottom, since we've already acknowledged that should be on the table as well. And so you each are gonna get 3 dots, and you can put all 3 dots on one, or you can spread them around. Yeah, they're actually strips. Maybe this makes a good point. We want to be very good stewards of this beautiful cold room. So we don't want any dots sticking to the whiteboard. So you're each going to get 3 pseudo dots, and we want to just understand, where do you see the greatest potential priority in looking at these topics, where we should dig in next to help us roadmap. So that's the function of the exercise. But Michael and Mona, please help elaborate on sort of the approach and the intent and the philosophy here.
Does anyone not get it?
Can you elaborate a little on the residential redevelopment?
Yeah. Yeah, so the concept, well, I should kind of let Miles, but I'll give you that too. But redevelopment, see, is an issue, not an issue, it's an opportunity when it seems like about every 7 years or so, a house gets redeveloped. And it may go up in size, I don't think it goes down in size, but what does that do in terms of the impact on greenhouse gas emissions and some of the other impacts that we've been talking about? So that's why we're looking at redevelopment.
But isn't that is just a really tight sister to house size? I mean, in my mind, a lot of code you build around building a new house or rebuilding a current house, or how big could the current house be? Could we put those together?
It's almost a question of, if you're considering that house size should be an issue, say you think all houses should be 8,000 square feet. Do you believe that that should apply to redevelopment as well? Is one way of looking at it.
And everything else as well, right? Like everything.
New development and redevelopment. So if I have a house right now that's 15,000 square feet, and I decide I want a different house, and if I tear it down, I only get 8,000. If it's the new, should it apply?
Otherwise, how is residential redevelopment dealt with?
That's the question.
What you saying now?
How is it dealt with?
How is it dealt with now? Oh, I'm sorry. You can, basically you can redevelop to the size that you have today.
And then does it come under any sort of quota? You're working with the residential system, you just have to be pretty clear.
You can't exceed it if you have to stay within your footprint.
Suzanne, it's technical. No, I mean, if you're gonna tear down a house, you have 8,000 square feet today, where if you were building new, maybe you could only have 5,750 and have to use TDRs to go up to that. If you already have 8,000 square feet, you can tear it down, does not have to be in the same location. You have to go through site plan review. So you go through a review process, but that's really about, okay, now where are you putting the new house? What other, what are you changing, whatever might be involved, but you basically have the right to replace that 8,000 square feet. So only if you're exceeding that, say wanting to build back more, then you're into 2 yards of growth management.
So you're gonna
Yeah,
replace
now also, it's also rebuilding it free of mitigation,
Of what?
Sorry, Randy.
right?
Not necessarily.
My question was, so if you, in the example that Suzanne gave, you got an 8,000 square foot house, but zoning only allows for 5,750, you've got the right to rebuild 8,000 square feet. Different location, tear it all down, move it around, you've got to go through approval for site plan and probably activity envelope too, I guess, depending on where. But my question was, is it also the right to build that 8,000 square feet back free of mitigation?
And what do you mean by mitigation? Impact fees?
Affordable impact fees.
No, not necessarily. If you, that house, that 8,000 square foot house had never provided any mitigation in the first place, whether through, subdivision review, whatever it might have been, when you replaced, you would be on the hook for an employee housing.
So if it was a house that was built in the early 80s, it probably didn't.
Right, then we would capture an employee housing.
And I think maybe one context for why it's on the list from the board is, again, looking at that pacing and what's actually the elements that have been coming through over the past few years. And I think we shared this in the white paper, but also, right, the amount of building applications for new builds versus the amount of building applications for remodels is nearly double over the past few years. And so the other element of the redevelopment is, where is most of that activity happening in the county? Of what are the empty lots that can be built out versus what are the lots that are likely to be rebuilt?
I would like to make a suggestion, which is house size redevelopment is all sort of the same thing. It's a house generating a whole lot of carbon footprint that has to have hopefully new codes, VA energy or whatever. And couldn't we put that on film? Because these other things are so very different. I mean, short-term rentals is very different. And affordable housing, I'm just saying, I think there's a big chunk of just house, whether you are rebuilding or building a new one, they should come under the same standards and limitations and whatever we come up with. I want to waste one of my green stickies on 2 house things. I would rather take my green sticky for one great big house thing with similar things.
Trying to call it down 3 so she can vote.
So, I mean, is anybody?
She wants 3 for 1. That's okay, no, I think that's see my point.
John, go ahead.
I just have a quick clarification, maybe you guys can help me with this. The residential redevelopment, I feel like within the vision and the goals from VLCC with energy use, and the existing stock of houses that we have in this valley and looking at upgrades for that is, in my mind, maybe a part of that, of the big topics as well. Because I imagine, I mean, I get it, all the new construction totally makes sense, and I agree with all that, but I think, is that out of our scope to try and deal with existing stock of homes and energy use and code in terms of that? Because I think that's a big number that we really aren't talking about.
Well, the quick answer to that is definitely within your scope if that's where you choose to prioritize.
Yeah. Add that in it as well.
Let me just kind of pull back for a second, because we actually have 2 options here. I think Christie is in some ways arguing for the option that we're not pursuing right now, which is so we had option A, which was just to go through the threshold questions and ask if they belong or not within just a similar kind of broad thumbs up, thumbs down, should they be on the table. Option B was to try to prioritize them, which was to sort of, get us a little more focused. And it feels in some ways, at least Christie and maybe John is sort of saying, you don't want to knock anything off the list. You want to, and maybe, I think, Christie, to your point, residential redevelopment could be dealt with, relatively easy in a big picture sense, which is to say, we want all the work that we do to shape this sector in the way that we want to apply to that too. And it would, if we might be able to reach that consensus on that subject fairly easily. And we shouldn't do it at the expense of something else, right?
Okay, I'll back off for sure. Okay, let's go.
I'm saying that maybe, I'm asking the group, if you would rather just thumbs up and thumbs down through the whole list.
Yes.
Or.
Yeah. Just more than three, I would also want
Who's votes for those?
Everybody
This is why we encourage in person. It's a little messy, it's okay.
So some people's votes.
Well, I think that the county needs to revise its current STR policies. How does that, they haven't asked us to do that. That seems to be completely another left field. I think they need to revisit, but how does that affect these other ones? I mean, the house size includes the TDRs and GMQS and residential redevelopment. Those to me all fall under house size. Once we talk about those, they're all going to be covered. STR policies is left field for me. I mean, I think the county needs to look at it, but I don't think they asked me and this group to talk to them about STR policies. I don't see how that fits.
The only way it really relates that I can equate to is when we started talking about activity levels. You know, should houses act like houses versus.
Size again. Size again.
Yeah.
If we address the size, that addresses STR use as well as if we're talking about activity to me.
There's tiny little cabins that are wanting to be, you know, short-term rentals way up in the mountains.
What is what is the county's authority regarding short-term rental policies? What can the county do?
So counties just a couple of years ago were given state level authority to regulate short-term rentals. They didn't have it up until just a couple of years ago. Glenwood dealt with this problem 10 years ago. So the cities could have been doing it all along. So, and the county took a run at it recently, and I would say went pretty light touch, which is they're just requiring registration, very limited fees, right? But I think, Doug, to your question, you know, if you look at the list, well, you know, a vehicle trips, a housekeeper that's coming, you know, people who are car tied as a tourist within our community, they're decoupled from our transit system as a form of lodging, short-term rentals. It actually ticks a lot of the areas of concern, I think, and you know, housing functioning like housing, sort of a corollary to that is not functioning like lodging, right? And so I think that that it ticks a lot of the boxes, and maybe we don't do a deep dive on it and say, hey, here's what your short-term rental policy should be. Same with housing, but we could say to them, look, the problem that you've asked us to solve and the reasons you've asked us to solve it, particularly the quality of life, these things where you've landed now on these two issues is not helping. You are kind of asking us to solve problems that you are shirking based on what you've done around these two issues. And it could be just a statement like that, like you guys got this wrong. And you're asking us to fix things that you're getting them wrong is making worse. So it could be as broad as that. But the reason they're on the list is because they came up a lot in the conversations that this room has had. So we don't want to, I mean, I think you're right, they haven't asked us to do it, but I think we have the right to say to them, yeah, but you got it wrong, you need to do something about it.
Well, and you know, totally get what you're saying, and I was thinking the same thing when I first saw it. As I go a little more through this, and as I see a bigger picture of everything else, one of the things I feel we're missing, we're all talking about these concepts and great things, but I think a lot of the concepts that we want are going to require some funding. And that may be one of the levers that we could use for the funding to do some of these other things. Now, whether it's in our purview to be able to do, I don't know. Let's face it, we're all coming up with great ideas. We need to be able to fund these ideas, and we have the money in this document. We need to figure out ways that we can get it and still feel like we're speaking for our hearts. Like we've got it.
So we okay, just
Yeah, just to Max's point too, I see a lot of initiatives coming on board in the last 3 years that deal with affordable housing, childcare, transit, that all require funding. And I can't imagine trying to, decide who gets what, but I think of this as an opportunity to look at what the resettlement of this community looks like, not the redevelopment, but the resettlement. And what our priorities are to reestablish a community that really honors the values that I fear in this room. And I see the competition to do that is going to be extremely difficult to go up against the applications that we see routinely now on both of our subdivisions I'm involved in. It's almost like you have to build a team that can be as competitive as the team you're dealing with. And the only way I see that we can do that is to engage the entire community and get them to say, this is the kind of resettlement we want. And whether it's future land use or whether it's smaller houses or whatever it is, but the social fabric, the piece of it and that's built into the commissioner's goals. And the commissioner's goals will be accomplished. Climate change, the 2030 goal, they will be accomplished if we do the appropriate resettlement. But if we just get focused on how do we get, I just also oftentimes think maybe backwards, but I'm not looking at getting to a goal of climate change by 2050. I'm getting to a resettlement pattern that allows us to meet that goal.
Okay, so
that's two different things.
I think it's a great way to think of it. So you can ask yourself as you're looking at these and help us understand, would these dials help sort of?
I think politically, if we come back and are congruent with what the community is saying to us about the demand that is pressed on us from large homes, how do we accommodate? I think that if we are congruent with what the community is saying about affordable housing and what businesses and everybody in the hospitals and the whole community is saying about affordable housing, and also concentrating our growth in appropriate areas. Those seem to be the top three for me, and those are the ones that present the most challenge. And out of those solutions come impacts globally, positive impacts globally. That's just, I've just got my shoulder replaced, so I have 2 weeks of sitting around with good pain medicine and stuff. So that's what I've come to after sort of being mentored and browbeaten by.
You want to share?
Yeah. I don't know a lot of that stuff. Yeah. We're doing.
So does anyone need any clarification on what these mean?
Where the word overhauling the current system can come from. I wouldn't say, my feeling is there doesn't need to be an overhaul. There need to be adjustments. But overhauling suggests, you're replacing the motor or something.
Yeah. Fair.
Is that what everybody else feels as well?
I think that it might be a full overhaul.
Yeah.
I would say that at this point, I don't think that we should be saying it's a tiny tweak or it's a total rewrite. I don't think we're there yet as a group. I think it's just recognizing that there's some kind of change that needs to happen.
Yeah, well, it's probably a question what you consider an overhaul to be, but, I see it as adjustments, but,
We can promote.
Recalibrating?
Just changing.
Yeah.
Changes, yeah.
Changes to the.
Judgment on what that change.
Just to clarify, TDR is not increasing the amount that can be built overall. It's taking something from one place and moving it to another. So if you could build 1 million square feet in this valley, you're not being able to build 1 million to 2,500 square feet. You're just taking it from one property and moving it to another.
Well, that's not entirely accurate.
Not really,
Not really.
because you're taking a 1,000 square foot rural remote piece of something and turning it into 2,500 square feet. So you're actually increasing the.
And then GMQS, you are actually increasing, like that's in addition to, that's not taking from somewhere else, that's just increasing the amount of square foot.
Right.
Okay. I just want to clarify.
I was just looking at the the expert.
Correct,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah.
That's news for.
Okay, so changes, everybody's good at that.
Yeah, so everyone likes that belongs, right?
Yeah.
But maybe we'll just, if you think that it doesn't belong, say something, or if you think it needs to be sharpened up in some way so that it's like the threshold question topic itself is a little more directional.
What are we seeing online, Mavis?
I'm just typing the changes that have happened.
What is it
So they
saying?
can all look at them, but they all, everybody put in their 3 choices, so since we're doing something different, I'm just explaining to them.
I just can't read where it says revisiting urban growth, and above that it says land use, what's that?
Patterns.
Okay.
So the next one, residential redevelopment. So what we've talked about a little bit without changing this is, should all the work that we're doing be equally applicable to redevelopment as it is to new development?
Are you taking votes now?
Oh, yeah.
Are we walking through them or?
Yeah, I mean, well, you can ask a question, you know, we're walking through.
Okay.
Can you still only get 3
Yeah.
times?
We'll just
Sorry.
go through it.
Can we just run this up and down on 3? We get another 3. Yeah, we're all, yes, we get another 3. We're asking everybody to give a thumbs up or a thumbs down on each one that they can cover.
And just to clarify for our folks online too, what we're doing is just like we did for house size, you know, should this issue be on the table, thumbs up, and what we proposed. If anyone thinks it should not be, speak now.
So some of us, if you've already started, Michael, some of us weren't aware of that, so.
Let's take it from the top.
Okay, take it from the top.
And do you want me to read it to the folks online?
Sure.
I'm typing too. so I should be
Okay,
able
first
to-
one, changes to the current GMQS and TDR systems. Should it be on the table? Seeing all thumbs up. And checking the virtual, I'm not seeing any dissent. Okay, on the table, going once, going twice. Putting up the check. And number 2, residential redevelopment.
Yeah,
I would ask, yeah. Is anyone not voted? Well, I think it's a good point. Anyone abstaining?
Yeah, so yeah, because if we had more formally not exercised this, you know, we would have a numerical representation of unanimity or, you know, very strong majority. So if you don't think it belongs on the list, please say so that we can note that, so that we know that we're not at total unanimity, because that's actually quite powerful if we win there.
Sideways, like unsure.
Yeah. But I think we got a full room of thumbs up, and are you seeing a full room of thumbs up to the residential, to the redevelopment?
Yes.
Okay. Should revisiting current short-term rental policies be on the table as a topic of discussion? So we've got some thumbs down, so somebody needs to take action.
What we're doing seems to be it felt like we were going in the direction of prioritizing this list.
Yeah.
But just by simply putting a check there, we're really not. It will equal STR policies will equal all the others.
Are we just saying that these need to be open for conversation? I think that's what we're doing.
I'm for discussing it, but it doesn't elevate to the extent of the others, of the top 2. If that-
Right, and just to clarify for everyone, this is the pivot away from prioritization, just like we did for house size, just seeing what should be on the table. Michael Lorna said an accurate clarification. And it's not prioritizing, it's not making any decisions. And as we've said with all of these threshold questions, they all, once we get into it, bring up if so, how questions, a much deeper dive. This is just, should we ever talk about this again? I'm trying to channel my own Max.
So let's do that one, the short-term rental policies. Who is keeping track here? You are, okay, so you see that Glenn has his thumbs down?
No one
Mavis?
has thumbs up or down.
Maybe we're talking about it in room two.
Why don't you just have a raise there, so we can really see the cards?
Yeah.
So we've got a couple thumbs down.
Sorry,
Got some neutrals.
I think a lot of us in the neutral are kind of agreeing with maybe Tim on the, yeah, we want to talk about it, but it's not that big a price, it's not as big a priority as some of the others. That's how I feel, and I also think Michael's solution to the STR thing would be great. Just like send something to the county commissioner saying, hey, you guys got to do something about this. Don't ask us to do your work.
But with limited time and resources, we need to continue to meet to zero in, and if we continue to say thumbs up on everything, we're gonna be here in 3 months still saying thumbs up.
Yeah.
And that's why I know you're saying we don't need to prioritize, but to me, we do need to prioritize.
But maybe we are, maybe thumbs down and half thumbs is creating that for us. And I think, because I think, Max made a great point earlier, which is we need funding for this, and if just the message on short-term rentals is, you got it wrong, it's an opportunity to create funds for some of the other things that you need to do. And the discussion can be more or less that. So if we can just get an accurate account on the funds up, sideways, or down, that will help. But that, I think that's a form of prioritization. So
Maybe you check mark this one off, but don't circle it.
Straight line with the circle is maybe not a hard X.
So did you get it?
Got
it. You got the thumbs up, down, sideways?
And upside down check mark.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah. And Adams has his hand up.
Okay.
Adam.
Go ahead.
Alex sent a note out in the chat earlier, kind of reframing some of these. I just want to make sure I'm clear that revisiting urban growth boundaries is actually revisiting land use pattern and urban growth boundary.
Yes.
Correct.
This is just my thinking on things. I think STRs and affordable housing kind of slide into that. I think there's some level of land use pattern conversation where we'll probably address things like affordable housing, the proper locations or not, as well as STRs potentially. So I think someone said, I think these are potential ingredients that just come up, maybe not singular priorities, but my opinion is affordable housing and STRs fall within the bucket of revisiting land use patterns and urban growth boundaries. Just some food for thought, maybe.
That's good, yeah. Thank you, yeah.
Well, not necessarily, because the service providers, police, fire, school, hospital, all those employees that are generated by expansion of government or special districts or whatever it is, are not the same as the workforce that's generated by the free market. And I think a future land use pattern talks about density in terms of mostly commercial real estate and residential development in a specific area. But the areas that get developed, whether it's a ski area expansion or a hospital expansion or a police department expansion, are not necessarily tied to land use patterns. Those are tied to what the land use patterns create. So you can't, it has to be a comprehensive affordable housing policy. And I think that's what we're hearing from the business community. They're willing to step it up now and partner with the government to solve that problem through land use. So I don't think it can be less of a priority personally than you know, the house size, there's a growth boundary or land use pattern. I think it's a very, very big issue because it's right now, the recent article in the London Post talking about the transit, you know, transit vehicle trips from Rifle Parachute, Grand Junction up to the valley, where are they stopping, where are they going, et cetera, really shows us that how the workforce is not coming from here. And so if we're gonna meet those climate change goals, we have to have a workforce here. Located here.
So your point is that belongs as its own.
It belongs in its own. I mean, it's, if you ask 50 people out there in the street right now, 40 of them will say, I'm looking for a place to live.
And my point, I guess, was that they're intertwined. I mean, our land use policy right now doesn't allow for much affordable housing consideration outside of very, very specific locations or zone districts, predominantly urban growth boundaries. So to achieve, I think what you're saying, that's why I'm tying affordable housing with land use and location. I don't think we have many opportunities right now as things stand for significant added affordable housing stock without looking at where is that stock going to locate. So that I wasn't saying one's necessarily a higher priority. I just think you can't talk about one without the other.
Because I think maybe, Adam, what happens there is that the revisiting urban growth boundaries moves up the list and gets talked about sooner. But I think I would agree with Rick, because even if, say, you got the urban growth boundary land use pattern to allow affordable housing, the county right now has no way to pay for it. Because they have chosen not to create any meaningful funding mechanism for it. So, like, if you get what you might need within revisiting land use patterns, you're still stuck because you need somebody to help pay the bill, right?
If you have places to actually build the housing, I just think you can't untangle one from the other. They're just, everything's so interrelated, whether it's policy specific to a funding program or where you can and can't build affordable housing. I don't think you can speak to one without speaking to the other.
I'd say that's true for virtually all of these things. There's going to be.
I agree as well.
Jessica,
I was just going to say that for me, when I have talked about affordable housing within this context, my perspective is, yes, about the location, but it's also about the mitigation that large homes are required to pay relative to their affordable housing impacts. And I don't think that the county right now captures some of that. And so to me, this statement is more about that in the context of house size and how our houses mitigating for their impact, which includes affordable housing. And that the locational piece is more about this land use patterns. And so I do think that they're different. And so I just wanted to add that.
But could they both live within an affordable housing conversation?
Absolutely, but that's why I'm sort of pushing back on it's not just about location.
Right, so maybe what I'm hearing is that there's enough to be discussed within the affordable housing question. It sounds pretty rich and robust. Maybe we're zeroing in on it belonging, and Adam, it might be the inverse of what you were proposing, that the urban growth boundary, a version of that question belongs in the affordable housing question.
Whichever inverse or how it occurs, I just think you can't talk about one without the other. I agree with what Jessica said, and that there is an element of land use or patterning involved with larger affordable housing policy and strategy conversations.
Okay, so maybe could we, Suzanne?
I would caution you about giving up your power. You have a lot of it. I mean, there were at least 70 more people who wanted to sit on this board that you're on right now that didn't get appointed. And so the commissioners have given you a lot of power. And so if you look ahead and start saying, oh, there's funding for it, or if Tim says, okay, we want to be protected in terms of land rush, let's think about a moratorium, but you say, oh, they would never do it, it's politically too hard. Take your power on, keep it, push the commissioners. If they haven't walked up to the line and they don't have enough courage or will to do it, you are to be precise people. How many? 29 people, 26 people that they appointed to tell them what to do. So tell them. I mean, and if you want to expand it, expand it. And then go in there and don't go in there saying, well, you probably won't do it. Push them hard, because there are other groups that will push hard in the other direction, and they won't take no for an answer. So don't give up your power. You can step a little straighter and, you know, get your shoulders square. Don't think ahead that you're going to fail. Think ahead at how you are going to push and give those people some courage.
Thank you, yeah.
Okay.
So with more oomph.
Yes.
The affordable housing policies, and we just had kind of a great meeting conversation about it right now, along on the list. Boris, is your side thumb for the housing question?
Sorry, was that directed to me?
You just said, it says side thumb there. I want to make sure we're attaching it to the right question.
Oh, no, my side thumb was for the STRs.
Did you get it as a side thumb? Yes. Okay, we got that. Thanks, Boris. Okay, sorry.
And thumbs down or thumbs sideways for affordable housing? Okay, orange check.
This is the last opportunity here. We'll look at revisiting, and we reworded this on the board to say revisiting land use patterns. So that's what we're looking at now. So thumbs up, sideways, or down? If you know, Glenn, Randy. Anybody?
Cliff, was that a neutral on this one, on the land use patterns?
You're muted.
Thumbs up to land use.
Phil, Sterling? Chris, Angus, you're chatting, everybody's chatting.
Chris is up. Thumbs up.
Everybody virtually is.
Brian, thumbs up. Yeah. Adam, thumbs up.
Glenn, would you mind just expanding on that for us, just so
I don't
understand why you don't support
I
that?
don't want to see development pods all up and down Lower Fork Valley, even if they're transit oriented. I think it'll end up, like the Eagle River Valley. I think we ought to contain the growth within the urban growth boundaries and not spread it throughout the Roaring Fork Valley.
Clint, could you
I agree
see,
with you, but I just think it should be a conversation.
could you see, I mean, when I look at that question, I think of it pretty broadly. Revisiting land use patterns might mean expansion of the urban growth boundary versus new pods.
Yeah,
That's what
I don't want to see that either.
Part of that that I think is really interesting is as it relates to TDRs, as we have these different caucuses captains at 5750, then you have all of these TDRs thrown into just certain zone districts. And a lot of them, like, I think one of my frustrations is seeing those just right on the edge of what is rural and remote. You're like right across from the North Star, and you're building this big going in. And so that's one part of that conversation is, I think, just narrowing where that development can be. But because a lot of times it's just, you're adjacent to these beautiful rural locations and you have these humongous homes.
So your argument is to decrease the urban growth boundary?
No, I'm saying that it would be good if that was focused, because right now you can use a TDR anywhere in the rural area. You can use it. You just take it out of the rural remote, but then you put it just sometimes few hundred feet to the, so that's just my thought on it. Because the original intention was for it to go within the urban growth boundary.
That's another land use pattern question,
Mhm.
transitional zones. or-
Right.
And I think we've got to come from Cliff.
Cliff, go ahead.
When I read the land use patterns, I saw it as zoning. That conversation about zoning would be included. That was my understanding.
Well, go ahead, John.
I was just gonna say, could that not include zoning in that category? Revisiting land use patterns and zoning.
I'm looking at the experts, is that what we're talking about is zoning essentially?
Yeah, because we have had a lot of conversations about zoning and zoning it right, and so I guess I'm trying to struggle, I go back to your point about being a layperson, I'm like a real layperson when it comes to land use, the zoning and the land use patterns, and so how do we tackle the zoning, or is it land use patterns? And
It's all part of it.
Well, I'm curious, Glenn, you know, what kind of brought the thumb down to up when we
It's
included
an urban
zoning?
growth boundary and developed along the transit corridor is something I don't want to see change.
So by bringing zoning into it, that gives
It's
you.
a general zoning discussion on the corridor.
so is zoning the appropriate conversation, Cindy, or is it two separate things?
The urban growth boundaries and the rural areas are all part of zoning. You know, it's all just part of zoning. So the bigger heading of looking at zoning could include revisiting land use patterns.
Or does land use pattern come under zoning?
Yes.
So zoning is the bigger heading. And then land use pattern comes under that.
That's where I would look at it.
So what I'm hearing is revisiting zoning and land use patterns as a subset, so putting zoning in there first.
What do you all think of that? Is that a thumbs up?
And Cliff has his hand up, so.
Up, Cliff.
I didn't take it down, sorry.
No problem.
So it sounds like that's a move to go forward with that. Okay. With that conversation.
Can I just comment that this is where jurisdictional shopping happens? And in a linear valley like ours, you know, our Picking County line is half a mile that way. So everything from a half a mile that way down needs to have the same sort of land use pattern in agreement with these jurisdictions that we deal with, which I think there's 8 of them. I agree with Glenn, we don't want to see the infill between Catherine Store and Algebel occur, but if you look at the development pattern that exists, maybe this is the next step we can do. The linear valley and the public lands and open space purchases have driven us into specific transit routes. And the problem we're having as we resettle Basalt and resettle Algebel is just the type of development that's acceptable to the community. And part of getting climate change accomplished is convincing people that this is a good way to go. You know, this is the appropriate way to go. The land use, if we continue to, in different, Carbondale has the opportunity to go 360 degrees, but Basalt is a very linear dog bone, they call it, you know. Glenwood, again, has a real opportunity to grow into a significant resort, period. And I think that whole, and this has been talked about for a long time. But I think that our power, to Suzanne's point, is to try and take this to the other governments, either through the Picking County Commissioners or through your locally elected officials, and convince them to get on board with this. So that it doesn't become an issue of, well, I can get an easier deal going with Eagle than I can a mile away. And, you know, that's the impact I think we have to have to meet the commissioner's 2050 goal.
I think, the question becomes, how reasonable is that to achieve within the sort of the levers and tools that we have, which is, I would say, not great, because it requires Eagle County to just, change their policies. But I think regionalism came up a lot as a goal for the group. So I think it's a reasonable sort of offshoot, like within, so imagine that this is a 50-page recommendation that gets made. Like that's a piece of it, is like you've got to try to get the other jurisdictions to kind of use this as their guide, because it's what the community over here wants.
I think they're ready. I think they're ready. Just level of Glenwood, Carbondale, of course, Basalt, and maybe, as you go down the I-70 corridor, it's a different environment, but there's a readiness level here to have those conversations.
We have 8 minutes.
Sorry.
So we that I believe got the full, did you guys count it?
Yeah.
I think it's a check
It
with
does.
the orange.
Yep. Let's speak now. Online. Okay. So the change was revisiting zoning and land use patterns on the
When that fits your desire change.
Yeah, that's okay.
Yep.
So now we're gonna, in the coming weeks, we're gonna need to start building scenarios and diving deeper into these threshold topics and explore really how they're interconnected in relation to the. And so I am gonna ask Miles, are we going to tackle these one per meeting? Are we going to tackle them? How do you see this unfolding for us?
Well, and I think first and foremost, we'll be working with the co-chairs to make sure that this is a committee-driven process. But my sense is the information that we've gotten tonight, based on this conversation and what's on the table, will give us what we need to develop some scenarios that we can bring to this group to really start to make this real and dig in and really answer some of those key if so how questions. Now we've set the table, we've decided we're making a stew, we know what our ingredients are, now we're gonna start looking at the recipes. And Michael, Mona, and Cindy, and Kara, please elaborate.
I think one thing from the staff perspective, I would ask to all of you, and I know we started off this meeting a little bit, is where do you need deeper dive on some things and where do you not, right? I know we've talked about that in a lot of these areas. We can definitely build out the scenarios, but also understanding where you need a little bit more information would be helpful for us as well as we start thinking about the scenarios and what we bring down to you all.
Do you want us to tell you now or an email?
Jennifer?
Like for instance, what does it really cost to make a house net zero? Is it possible to even make it positive zero? Is one of the comments. So I think what's the tether to reality on that?
I won't say on that. The zoning stuff, the single stuff, I think get up on really not very well versed in zoning, just in general.
So Jennifer was right up and down, Jennifer.
Basically, I was wondering if we had any information on redevelopment versus ground up residential and what are the construction impacts? Is there a variance between the two? If you're redeveloping something that's 10,000 square feet or doing a ground up that's 10,000 square feet, are there different impacts, energy impacts?
One question for just like a legal question is, when we start talking about TDRs, can the increments of them be changed? Could you take one TDR and turn it into 1,000 feet for thousands of feet? That doesn't present legal problems or it's not taking.
More political.
Political, okay.
The board has the
do anything
power.
we want, right?
Yeah, the board has the power to make that legislative change.
And if there's others, to Chrissy's point, I think if you just send them to the project team as they come up, we'll be gathering, I think a lot of this we have, is just, again, how do we bring all that information to you all? So feel free to email us of other things that you think would be valuable as we start to bring scenarios into your decision making.
I have a question. that came up, Tim brought it up, that, and maybe it was Tim, I apologize for confusing the two of you. But he brought up the concept that there may be a rush for development. And it concerns me as well, and the idea of a moratorium. And so I guess I don't know how I ask the question, is this something that we should consider recommending to the county commissioners at this point? And to suggest that our committee is in this process of having a conversation about choosing land use patterns, zoning, house size. We're considering all of these activities right now. And would you consider enacting a moratorium on development while we deliberate?
It's a sword that cuts both ways.
I bet, and I bet I don't know all the ways that it cuts on the negative side.
It's got a tool.
Other tools that could be used to protect the community and this committee's recommendations, other than a moratorium.
Shy of a moratorium, you could do something, you could ask the board, to say moratorium on anything larger than, or something like that. You know, not that you stop all development.
When is the board update that we have to give? When is the board update that you will be giving?
December 6th.
Is that something that we would want to recommend to the county commissioners at that update? I think Michael and I will probably be part of that.
That's a massively consequential.
I'm gonna jump in and say that having been with the city of Aspen in 2012, when there was discussion of a moratorium that then didn't happen, the rush of applications took a decade to get through in terms of what was applied for and then finally developed. And it can cause a worse reaction than just waiting. And so I would strongly advocate for, it's maybe a tool in the toolbox, but it is not a tool that we use now, and it is a tool that is recommended in the future when we actually know what the recommendation of our group is.
Right, and we haven't discussed it, and Tim,
Right.
I appreciate your mentioning it, because it's a big idea, but that is a big discussion. Not a last 2 minutes of the meeting conversation.
In 2012, there was a rush for penthouse development.
Yeah, because Tori suggested a moratorium, we did not vote for it.
We have 2 hands up online.
Yeah, let's hear our online questions, and maybe we can go to the already.
Forest and then Club.
Okay, so that was, maybe it's a conversation for a later time, really to flesh out and focus on the priorities that we've set for our agenda for the next coming weeks. And then we'll go to the county commissioners, give them an update, and just focus on what we've said as our thresholds, our priorities that we've discussed tonight.
Well, I may be wrong, but that glut that would come in would be from something that somebody responds from in this group. And I haven't heard anything yet that we've decided on that would be that big of a trigger factor to do that yet. So I agree. I think if we wait and see that maybe we're gonna come up with one of those trigger factors, then maybe it's on board. But right now, I agree with Jessica actually mentioning the word one trigger.
Great. All right.
Forrest has his hand up. Forrest, go ahead.
Just one thing that I think we should consider that I'd like to propose as being part of the residential redevelopment discussion would be demolition percentage, like a demolition percentage discussion. So one of the biggest things we have issues with the landfill and the wastefulness that happens when houses get bought by the next owner is the complete demolition and reconstruction. Whereas I don't know that it's necessarily a land use thing, but I think it could be. If there was a limit on demolition percentage of the building, that could be super impactful on the environment. And of course, the loss of our landfill space. So I think we need to add that to the discussion for residential redevelopment. And then that can also set standards to how big the replacement house can be. If you're willing to leave 80% of the house, maybe you can maintain the same size because you're not destroying an entire house and bringing in all new resources to build it.
Thank you. That's a really good point. Okay, so we can send in questions to staff about more data, more deep dives. We're gonna meet in December.
Maybe we can go back. December 14th is our next meeting, and that's in APB as well.
Great.
Can I ask? Are we going to be done by February?
You just gave me the perfect setup to. Aaron, you want to take this? You want to take this?
Yeah, so we were talking, and I know it's on everyone's mind, ours as well, and we don't know the answer to that. So what we wanted to pose to all of you to think about is, I think what we would ask is what's your willingness to extend this through March? Not saying that's exactly what it would do, but it would provide us some level of intentional planning, I guess, not really rush. What would it look like for all of you to continue your commitment one more month through March? We want to take it further. So you don't need to answer. We just wanted to pose that to all of you to think about, and that will help us guide kind of the trajectory of what the recommendations are. Coming into this. Is that a deal? We'll revisit that and talk about what's realistic for all of your commitments. So.
I have a really quick question that I just need, if someone can answer is, does redevelopment at this point in time go through the DUG? No.
But in the past it did. Wait.
It's in some ways the single biggest exemption.
It was counted. It was counted.
Redevelopment.
Yeah, so it didn't go through a competition, but it was counted.
Statistics about numbers of redevelopment compared to development.
Yeah, in the white paper, we had what's remodel and demo versus new. I can't remember the numbers.
So redevelopment, if it expands, increases square footage, surely those would be.
Surely what?
Those would be in US, but if it's the same size, or does it not go through period?
Well, it depends. I mean, you could have a 4,000 square foot house at 157. You know.
I think what I'm hearing is we'll gather all the data, kind of like we did under House Size. We'll gather a little bit of a formation under kind of what redevelopment is and use that as like grounding pieces. I'm hearing a lot of questions in a lot of different ways on the redevelopment aspect, so we'll work on that.
I think that's a great part of the scenario planning is to really define, what these big topics include in terms of this discussion.
One last logistical question I would again pose to you in addition to continuing, I want to call attention, we are going into the holidays. We have a meeting on December 4th or 14th. We also then have a follow-up meeting on January 4th. That is not an Aspen School District vacation, but it is an RE1 school district vacation. So again, take a look so we can just have an understanding of how many people we might have in that meeting on January 4th, and that will help us plan, what kind of discussion we have. So.
Are we gonna have a holiday party?
We talked about
it. Host this meeting in Manhattan Club at the nearest bar.
It starts tonight. It's 6 o'clock.
You're our DJ. I guess it's DJ that we could call on.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you.
You know, I love talking. Three places. The scenario that comes to attention is real. Yeah, that's kind of different. We know that this year. It's being.
I mean, I can hang on to it, back me up.